Welcome to the SLAB. I'm Angie.
And I'm Nathan.
And we're here to talk about all things videography. You can view the video version of this podcast on youtube.com/@SLAB Visuals or listen through your favorite podcast app. We're coming to you from the Inland Northwest. We're based out of Spokane, Washington with our business, SLAB Visuals.
Yep. So on this episode, we're trying to do episodes that, are relevant to up and coming filmmakers and people who are just getting started or maybe established a little bit. And in this episode, we want to talk about drones for visual storytellers and why they're important. So basically, getting those unique and epic shots are crucial to video storytelling. And in my opinion, there's only one tool that can do this, and that's a drone. So today we're going to talk about several drones, the pros and the cons, and which drones are best for each videographer's needs.
That's right. So we're going to jump right into it. And maybe you're just getting started yourself. Maybe you're familiar with some of this. Hopefully you'll learn some new things and it'll be helpful. But we want to start with just a few of the brief reasons that you might be considering getting into drones or considering a new drone.
Yeah. So basically, kind of looking at it from a 30,000 foot view, no pun intended.
Right.
It adds. You shouldn't be flying your drone at 30,000 feet unless you're military. It adds depth to your visual language, and it helps you tell better stories. And really, at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to. It's a tool that helps you tell better visual stories. For example, I love it for getting an establishing shot. There's nothing better than just having that. I mean, you watch so many movies or even reality TV shows, they have that far out establishing shot. So,
really good for setting up the context of what you're about to share.
And it also gives you two unique perspectives that no one's seen before. Mm-hmm. So, let's say it's a location, that's been shot a bazillion times, but being able to get an aerial view of that and with the drone, flying legally, of course, checking airspace, it gives you unique perspectives, and that's also something that helps you. It catches the eye, helps you tell the story.
That's right. Yeah, and there's lots of reasons people do get into those drones. They've changed the landscape of commercial photography and videography. A lot, the primary purposes of those drones, the biggest industries are for surveillance, which is usually government and military, but thermal imaging. But then, of course, videography is a huge portion of that. 30% of the drone industry is videography and photography. And, forecasts of the demand of drones are estimated to grow 30% annually over the next 8 years. There's such an awareness now of the value of drone use. And it's so diverse, everything from FLIR, F-L-I-R, the lighter
looking infrared.
Yes, forward-looking infrared, and there's so many different use cases. And maybe you're into surveillance, and you're that top military, personnel that's making those decisions. But more than likely, we're probably looking more at the videography, cinematography side, and so that's really what we're focusing in here today. And one of the things I think that's interesting, and we'll link that article that's about the market analysis for drones because I thought that was really fascinating. It had some really good insights, but it's also kind of where the actual practical use of and the development of a drone, where that's headed. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, basically it comes down to more autonomy, right? AI is the big buzzword today. And
Right.
really, I heard someone say the other day, AI, what we used to call an algorithm and a lot of stuff, they'll just rebrand it AI because it's the buzzword and gets people to buy things.
Sure.
But really that's what it comes down to. So, more autonomy with the drone. So, being able to set a course or say, hey, I want to capture this. Mm-hmm. And then the drone will go and figure out, based on the environment that's in, it'll recognize what's around it and then plot a course to give you the best shot. Right. Or whatever most interesting shot for that scenario.
And object tracking and things like that, right?
Object tracking, yeah. Mm-hmm. And that comes down to also better sensors and processing. Mm-hmm. So, as technology obviously gets better, just like our phones, the sensors can process more data without overheating, and so you'll get better images, and also better obstacle avoidance. So if you're flying,
yes, you want to avoid the obstacles for sure when you're flying a drone.
Yeah, that ends up for the bad day if you're hitting.
We've all
trees.
been there. Let's just put that out there. But yes.
Yeah. And then the last one too, I think where drones are headed is that's going to change is going to be airspace safety. So really regulation. I mean, we're still kind of in the early days of, consumer drones,
Right.
right? And I think they're still trying to figure out, with the advent just around the corner of drone delivery that's kind of been rolled out in other countries. They're still trying to figure that out in the U.S. airspace because there's a lot of companies that are putting a lot of money into that kind of
Yes.
research. So
Yes.
figuring out how to do that safely and how drones fit within the U.S. Airspace to do that safely as more and more drones come
Totally.
online and more people are flying them.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah.
kind of moving out of the wild west of drones and into hopefully a little bit more
Yeah.
structure to,
I think I think the industry's finally kind of settled a little bit,
yeah.
which we'll talk
Yeah.
about in a minute here, but there's kind of only really one or two players in the consumer
Consumer.
drone space
Exactly.
as opposed to enterprise
Yes.
drones. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, and I think so as we talk about drones today, like one of the main tenets is like if we're assuming like maybe you're checking this out because you haven't flown drones a lot, or maybe you're interested in DJI drones and what that's like. And so, one of the first things we want to look at when you're kind of getting into the drone game is the ease of learning to be able to like, it can be really intimidating to fly a drone for the first time. And especially if you're investing a lot, we don't advise going out and buying an $8,000 drone and then learning on that, right? That would be kind of foolish. So let's talk. Can you share a little bit about like what drones you would go with for like ease of learning?
Yeah, definitely. So there's two different like main kinds of drones. There's like the quadcopter style. If you're watching
Quad as
this
in four.
episode, yeah,
Yeah.
as in four rotors. So if you're watching this episode, that's what we have on our desk here. We have one of the original Mavics and then the Mavic 2 that I've been, part of the business for years. And then the other style is FPV style. So it stands for first person view style. And that came out of like RC and racing drones. And, those are also a lot of times quads, but they're smaller. You usually wear a goggles and you have a camera on the front, and they are much more full control, I guess, access. There's less autonomy in those drones because
So
they're designed.
manual, very manual.
Oh yeah,
Yes.
yeah, 100. Yeah, a lot of times 100% manual.
Yes.
Yeah, and they're incredible what they can do. So, yeah. So I would say to learn, you definitely want to learn on a quadcopter style, not FPV, and it's much cheaper. So, the second thing is so you want a quadcopter. Second thing to consider is automation. Like how much automation do you want? And automation is great for learning because it's kind of like bowling with
It's a protective
the
factor, the
gutter.
bumpers.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a
the
protective factor.
bumpers. Yeah. And so it keeps you from getting into trouble, which is great. But the other thing is you have to remember, even though those are there, you still have to practice the basics of drone flight. So that's, takeoff and landing, control, being safe, flying around objects, flying with the drone facing you. That is a attacking. And anyone who's been in the RC world, I think this will come pretty easily to you. But if you're coming at, drones, quadcopters from, first time never flying anything, not doing any kind of RC control stuff, then, yeah, definitely a little bit of automation is nice. Yeah. So getting into the drones that we would recommend for learning, my kind of viewpoint is sticking, like I was saying earlier, that the main player that's kind of as the market has kind of leveled out, the main player is DJI. They've, back in the day, DJI, what was there was there's Autel, there was Parrot, there was 3DO, was it, or is it 3D? Oh,
That sounds
now I
right.
can't remember.
I don't know.
I had one of those for a little while and I returned it. GoPro even made a hexacopter at one point. It wasn't very good. But DJI is kind of, they've kind of taken the market in the game. I forget what percentage is, but they have a majority of it. And so my recommendation is going to be for a DJI drone, so that when you do, because the reason you're learning is because you want to put this into your workflow, right? And ultimately you're going to end up probably with a DJI drone, a nicer one with a better camera and more autonomy on it. So with that in mind, you want to learn the ecosystem, right? You want to learn the software, you want to learn what you can do, what you can't do, how it behaves, and all that with a DJI, with a controller and their software.
Right. Spare
So
yourself the growing pains of like changing, one of your
yeah, it's like
systems.
going, from Android to Apple or vice versa.
Yeah.
There's going to be a whole new learning curve just
Yeah.
on the software
Makes
side.
sense.
So, yeah.
And
So
we should state like we're not making money off of this from DJI.
no,
This is
no.
just like tried and true of what we have experienced that works really well for us
Yep.
and is our recommendation. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. So my recommendation is the DJI Mavic Mini 3, and a used one at that. And you might scoff at used, but really, if you're going to go out and learn, odds are you might hit a tree or bump into something, and you'd rather do that with a used drone than something brand new. I mean, they do have DJI Care Refresh that you can buy on their new ones, but I would say the DJI Mavic Mini 3, and those run used about $200 to $400, depending
Right.
on what city. If you're in a big city, you'll probably have a better chance
Right.
of finding one used. But there's always eBay. I see them for $200 to $300 on eBay there. Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the other thing too is the reason I recommend that is it's under 250 grams, and the reason that's important is when FAA came out with the regulations, if it's under 250, you can fly recreationally without having to register it, and so that's kind of a nice perk. It doesn't give you any advantages as far as where you can fly it because whether you're a 100-gram drone or a 20-pound drone, the regulations for the airspace remain the same of where you can and can't fly. Yeah. And then the thing to keep in mind with that too is if you are flying it, that it doesn't mean you have to fly it under the Part 107 if you're doing recreationally, but we'll talk a little bit about that later. The last thing is it has remote ID. So what remote ID is, back in 2022, the FAA said they wanted to have a way for if someone sees a drone in the sky that someone can look on an app and find out who the owner of that drone is, what the number is, in case, I guess they wanted to report it if the drone was doing something nefarious. And there's been a lot of hoopla over that. I don't know if I necessarily agree with it. And there was a comment period, and there was a lot of comment from the recreational industry. But come down to it, they ended up approving it, and that came into effect originally, I believe, in 2022, and then they pushed that a year to give people a chance to, if they had the legacy drones, to get a unit that you could buy, and there's a couple other things, but they ended up, that was last September, and they're still, as of that time, the only remote ID unit you could buy was like $200 or $300. And so also the places that are RC, what do you call them? RC flying. There's a name for them.
Fields, I don't know.
Yeah, it's RC clubs.
RC clubs,
clubs.
okay.
So the clubs had opportunity to apply for what they called a free zone, where they could apply to the FAA. The FAA said this place is a free zone. People can fly there without remote ID. It's usually a small radius of like less than a mile, and they still hadn't approved all the applications for that. So the FAA pushed the deadline again to March 5th of this year, 2024, as we're recording it. So all that to say, if you get this drone, it already has remote ID built in. You don't have to worry about any of that. You don't have to get any of the stuff. You're good to go. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. And I think that all comes back to the regulation that we see like coming, up in the future, and it's really good to stay up on that as a drone pilot because you don't want to find yourself in a bad situation, right? And as we're talking about drones, like, yes, we want to talk about like the quality of like video and the overall like durability and heft of that drone, because you might be shooting, some pretty rigorous stuff. You want your work to look the absolute best. So like what makes this meet up with those quality standards that you have for your videography?
Yeah, so our recommendations, so once you get past that initial learning phase and you get to the point where you're ready to say, I want a little bit better image, or I
Mm-hmm.
want a little more autonomy, or I want, something that can handle the wind a little bit better. These are the three that we'd recommend. So what I would consider adequate or basic for video and photography would be the Mavic, excuse me again, the Mavic Mini Pro 4. And really, this is actually just came out here of, we're recording in early 2024. And this little drone is an amazing piece of technology. I mean, basically, they took everything that they've learned from the Mavic Pro series and even their enterprise models, and they've packed it into this small, I believe it is a 250 gram, 250 gram drone without the extended battery, so if it just has the normal battery in it. And so that one runs at $759 currently. And that's a great, it's a great drone. But some of the things it lacks is like variable aperture and some of the higher bit rate codecs. So if you want video, if you're filming like water or trees, something that has a lot of movement, the amount of data that the drone can record matters. So the difference
Yes.
between 8
Yeah.
8-bit and 10-bit, right? So that's the first one. So the Mavic Mini Pro 4. The next one is the DJI Air 3, and so that one has a little bit longer battery life and a little bit better cameras. And that one comes in at $1099, so about $1,100. And again, we'll put all these comparisons on our website. We have a blog that will go, and you'll see the link. If you're watching this on YouTube or even in the podcast description, you'll see a link to our blog website on slabvisuals.com. Yeah. And then the premium quality, if you're looking for the highest high end for, this form factor. And if you're watching on YouTube, I'm holding up my Mavic 2. This form factor, the best one really is the DJI Mavic 3 Pro Cine. And that's the one that just came out last year. And that thing is a beast. It has 3 lenses on it, so 3 focal lengths of lenses on it. Has a great battery life comparable to the smaller ones. And the big thing is, if you listen to our episode on the iPhone for why as a filmmaker, it has Apple ProRes, and you can record full 10-bit Apple ProRes in Apple, and it's their
S-Log or
no,
Apple Log?
it's the DJI log. They call
Oh,
it
gotcha.
D-Log. Yeah, it's
D-Log.
their version of log. But yeah, you can shoot full ProRes, which again it just makes it look more cinematic if you're doing that stuff. And the images I've seen coming out of there, that's my current drone. We're going to talk about in a second about budgeting.
Lusting after that a
Yeah,
little bit.
that'll be the next
On
upgrade
deck.
from
On deck,
the Mavic Pro 2. So that they only offer the Cine. So there's a DJI Mavic 3 Pro non-Cine version that's a little bit cheaper depending on if you already have a controller or not. The Cine version that shoots the Apple ProRes, that only comes in a combo, and that is $4,800 with the Apple Cine ProRes. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. And, we want to talk a little bit about cost comparisons because, more than likely you're working at a business like that you are wanting to be profitable. And it's really hard to always discern is this worth the investment or not? And so there are other players in the game, and it's always good to know. And we always recommend cost comparisons. We also are not opposed to buying used and trying it out and stuff like that. So why don't you talk a little bit about that? Like, who are the main players in the cinema drone game, and how do their prices compare when you're looking at that beginner drone?
Yeah, I mean, kind of going back to what we said earlier, there used to be like 4 or 5. I think was it 3DO? That's gonna bother me.
Yep.
But you had like Altel, Parrot, DJI was there, and I'm talking like only 5 years ago. I mean, again, this is like the consumer drone technology has gone grown so quickly.
Right.
I mean, it's pretty bonkers. But Skydio, up until recently, it was DJI and Skydio, and Skydio had a really cool feature where you had like a little dongle that you'd put in your jacket, and so it would use that to follow you instead of visual reference. it would use that. But recently, as of the last couple of months, Skydio has gone purely enterprise, and so they launched a new drone. They still have the Skydio 2 Plus, but they all are using that for commercial operations. So things like construction or bridge
Right.
inspection or power lines or crop inspection and different stuff like that. First responder use, different stuff like that. So
Not for the general consumer videographer or photographer,
no,
really.
so it really only leaves, in my opinion, DJI in the drone space. Unfortunately, because I wish there were some good
Right.
competitors. But
Right.
yeah, and again, this is for quadcopters. If you get into like racing, like FPV stuff,
Yes.
DJI does have FPVs, but and they're good ones for someone who's coming from a consumer side. But if you're going to do a racing drone, it's probably going to be much more a custom setup, with your own, whatever camera
Right.
that you want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, was that kind of like the trajectory you went on? Like, how did you get to where you are now with your Mavic 2 and, poising to like want to get that, that next one? Like, what was your journey in like this
Yeah.
entering
Well,
into the drone game? And
yeah,
yeah.
no, it's good. Yeah, just briefly, like, I've always been interested in new tech, and back when drones were becoming more off the shelf and
Right.
less customized, my first one, I was working for a theme park, and so I wanted to capture some aerial stuff. And at that time, you couldn't buy like an off the shelf solution. You had to,
Sure.
usually it was like a hexacopter
Right.
for filming, and then you had to buy the gimbal separately. And
Right.
I had
Yes.
like a Canon, what it was, like an EOS M that I stuffed on there, and there was no remote control that you kind of like set it and forget it, up there. And then the
You get what you
hexacopter,
get.
yeah, and the
Yeah.
hexacopter was all carbon fiber tubing, carbon fiber props, and you had to set the speed controllers, and came with a DJI brain and the GPS thing, and it was like, it was scary when that thing took off because half the time it would just go, like tilt over,
Uh-huh.
and it did one time, and that was an expensive, yeah,
Repair. Yeah. Yeah.
tilt over.
Yeah. An expensive learning curve back then.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. But that's where I started, and so it gives you more appreciate. It gives me a lot of appreciation for what we've got now,
Right.
and like how easy it is to like walk into a store and buy
Yes.
something that you could be up and flying today without any kind
Yeah.
of dialing in and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that was, and then eventually I had like one of the Phantom, the first or second Phantom.
Right.
And then from the Phantom, I moved on to the Mavic, original Mavic, which is what I have sitting here on the table if you're watching on YouTube.
Which you've always kept like as a backup, like in an emergency case. It's always good as you upgrade to have one that if you got to make do, you got to make do. And if you don't get rid of that, it's nice to just know you have something in your pocket that if something goes awry, you've got that, because it happens. But fortunately, that hasn't been the case for us with DJI. It's been very reliable. Yeah.
Yeah, for the most part, except for when they stopped supporting Android, their app on
Right.
Android. That was really frustrating. Then I had to buy an iOS device just so I could keep flying.
Yeah.
That was, yeah. And you always run that risk with, and that's why I said I wish there was more competition in the marketplace,
more
because
options.
when there's only one manufacturer and they decide to stop supporting their app on on an Android platform, it's
Right.
like, that's really frustrating. And,
It kind of ties your hands as to what you're going to do.
Can do. Yeah.
Yeah, and giving up the drone game isn't really an option for us. Like
No, it's, I mean,
really
I think
important.
it's an expected tool. Like if you are
Yes,
doing visual storytelling in 2024,
absolutely.
I think it's become, an expected part of the
Yeah.
visual language. And, a lot of times we'll find, too, like when we talk to a client and we tell them that we're Part 107 certified and can fly, they're like, oh, you see their eyes perk up, because that is definitely a value add for if you're a business doing this.
And there's some industries where it's just absolutely expected. I think real estate is one of those.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
for real estate photographers, like I don't know. I read something. I'm not going to quote this because I don't know where it was, but it was something between like 91% of sellers expect that their realtor will offer drone photography. Like, and sometimes they don't know that it's even a drone that's providing that, but they've seen other people's work and go like, well, of course that's going. You're going to offer that, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And so it's extremely important, and it's changed a lot of industries, like the real estate industry for sure. And then like you're gonna find like as time goes on, these things don't last forever, or maybe you outgrow them. And like, what are the primary impetus for like when you're ready to upgrade or get a new drone? What usually like happens that forces you into that, like, no, it's time. I need to get a new drone. I can't hang on with this one any longer.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a couple things, that I think about. One of them is, like we talked about earlier, as far as what's coming down the line,
Sure.
is new tools
Mm-hmm.
through better technology, right? So, as technology gets better, cameras get smaller, the sensors get better,
Yep.
the dynamic range in those sensors get better. And then sensors for safety, sensors
Sure.
around the drone, like this. My DJI Mavic 2 has, sensors 360, so on the top, the bottom, all over, and that's
Yep.
been hugely important for, like if you're doing, construction or real estate,
Yes.
and you've got trees and stuff, and you want to get just that right angle. It's nice to know you have that, a little bit extra. Like the drone will tell
Mm-hmm.
you, like, oh, I'm 4 feet away from
Right.
this wall, or
Right.
I'm 10 feet away from this
Right.
tree or something. That's like,
And that equates to being a more confident flyer, right? When you
mm-hmm,
have those sensors that are going to give
mm-hmm,
you the feedback in a timely fashion to be able
yep,
to navigate and maneuver, that boosts your confidence in
mm-hmm.
what you're able to capture.
Yeah, yeah. So that's, so reasons to upgrade is, better technology,
Mm-hmm.
better imaging, better images will up your game as far
Mm-hmm.
as, again, for a business and to sell that to a client.
Yeah.
The second one is battery degradation, degradation. Sorry,
Right.
say that 10 times
Deterioration, whatever
fast
you
while
want.
you're flying backwards. Yeah. So you get to a point where, I have 5 batteries for my Mavic 2,
Mm-hmm.
and all batteries wear out after a certain time, and they start to get puffy, which is a sign that the cells are breaking down in the lithium ion.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, it's not safe.
Right.
And after so many charge cycles, I forget what they're rated for, if it's like 200 or 300 or something, but and time as well. If they've
Right.
been sitting on a shelf for a
Mm-hmm.
long time, the batteries will
Deteriorate.
yeah. And so you reach a point where it's like, do I buy another 5 batteries, or because the batteries
Do I
aren't cheap.
invest that
They're
in the
anywhere from
next? Mm-hmm.
$100 to $200 depending on which drone
Yes.
you're in, using them for. So it's like, at 5 batteries, that's $1,000. You like,
Right.
do I drop $1,000 on a new set of batteries on a drone that's older, or do I put that thousand towards, the next level drone
Right.
that's already going to come with 3 or 4
Right.
batteries in the combo package,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's just something to consider.
For
And
sure.
then the third thing, so the first is, camera sensors. Second is battery degradation and replace versus upgrade. And then the third thing is, your better tracking capabilities, right? And
Mm-hmm.
stabilization and repeatability. So if you're doing, like time lapses or things where you want to repeat the
Right.
move,
Yep.
the GPS technology, the image sensing technology has gotten way better, even in the last like 2 years. I've noticed that on the drones. So that's another thing. So if that's part of your workflow and something that you use for, aerial time lapses
Sure.
and stuff like that, that's another part of that, technology upgrade is better tracking
Yeah,
capabilities.
and on that note of batteries, it just occurs to me because I don't know all the ins and outs. I'm not the videographer. I'm the person behind the scenes typically. But like you mentioned that you have 5 batteries for this drone.
Hmm.
Is that typical? Does that usually come along, or do you purposely buy others because of the battery life? And when you're filming these time lapses, you need to be able to be charging some while you're operating. Like, what is the point of 5 batteries for you? And is that typical of any drone that you're going to be using?
Well, I think it comes down to like being in a situation where if you don't have access to charging,
Right.
then you're going to want as many batteries as you can have.
Sure.
So, a couple scenarios I've been in where it's nice to have 5 batteries is
Yes.
if you're out on a motorcycle
Hmm.
for a day or a couple days and you're traveling remotely.
Remote work.
Yeah,
Yeah.
remote work. Yeah. And so you won't be able to charge. And so you want to have those batteries,
Yes.
as many as you can to go with you.
Right.
Another scenario is if you're doing inspections, like on a construction site
Hmm.
or for architecture, where, if you're going to be flying, pretty much off and on all day long, you want to
Right.
have, and, the batteries take so long to charge that you want to have enough batteries to where you can be flying and charging, and by the time you get to that last battery,
Right.
your first one you use is already charged back
Yeah.
up, so you can fly
Yeah.
perpetually throughout the
For
day,
sure.
that kind
Yeah.
of
Be
thing.
prepared. That's what you want to be as a videographer,
Yeah,
or a
yeah,
Boy Scout. Either way, be prepared.
yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, this is really key, and super important, is the safety and regulation and following those things. Like everything you do as a drone pilot, when you're flying a drone, reflects on everyone else. And so, you gotta, stay up with what the regulations are, and what we're all subject to FAA airspace jurisdiction. So, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it comes down to like, well, I always tell people, be safe when you fly, right?
Right.
Because your actions will affect, how everyone else
Right.
that sees
Yes.
drones,
For sure. And regulations are going to be shaped after like the incidents
mhm,
that happen. And
exactly.
the more incidents that happen, the more they're going to tighten down. And,
Yep.
that's not always convenient for you as a pilot.
And I do wish the drone manufacturers would do more to educate folks on, the what the requirements are. We live in the United States, so I don't know how it is for Europe or other countries necessarily, but I can speak for the US, and that, I wish there was more education around that,
Yeah.
because, like I said, someone can go out and buy a drone and they can, fly it. And there are certain hardware restrictions that they've put in now, especially the newer ones, that keep people from like flying near an airport, or flying, I don't know, and doing dumb things
Yes.
with drones.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
yeah, so that's my first thing, is just be safe. And so a couple ways that you can do that is, there's a app that the government has called the Drone Zone. The Drone Zone will give you a good idea of where you can fly and can't fly, or what the limitations are on there. The second thing is to look up how to get airspace authorization.
Right.
So there's a thing called the LANC network. It stands for Low Altitude Authorization and Notification Capability. That's a big word soup, but basically it's this thing where it's an app. There's a couple supported apps, and you go on there and it says, okay, you'll find your location and it'll tell you how high you can fly. Maybe it's 0 feet, so you can't fly and you have to get manual authorization, or maybe you can fly up to 100 or 400 feet, but you have to get authorization. And usually it's instant. Like in all the length stuff that I've done on there, it's been super fast, and it just lets it gives you an official number, so an approval number to fly there, so an authorization number, so that if you were questioned by like a police officer, for example, that you would have say, yes, I do have approval to fly here and this, and they would let you go on about your business. So so just knowing the safety and regulation, doing your due
Right.
diligence on that, I think is a responsible thing, especially if you're going to do it for work. Even if you're
Absolutely.
starting out, but if you're doing it for work, it's something you need to know. Yeah.
Yeah, it's CYA, right? Like make sure you know your stuff. And that's
Yep.
part of the Part 107 certification. Like that's a huge aspect of the regulation. Now, is that internationally enforced, the Part 107? Okay. So can
Nope.
you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, each country has their own rules. Like Canada has their own rules on their airspace. The FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration,
Right.
has their own rules. If you went to Australia, they have their own set of rules. So, if you're traveling for work, that's part of your responsibility
Due
as a
diligence.
filmmaker.
Yeah.
Do your due diligence on on what's required for there. I mean, in the U.S., you can pretty much consider that, once you step outside that door of a building, you're in
Yes.
the regulated airspace, right?
Yeah.
And
You don't
so
want to start a situation,
yeah, yeah,
especially internationally, like,
yeah,
that's
yeah,
big
yeah,
implications.
yeah. And I think we'll talk about, probably in a different episode, go a little more into depth, like what's required. To get your Part 107 certification, there's a test involved and studying.
Sure.
And then what that looks like to do like a manual authorization versus like a link auto authorization that we just talked about.
Yeah.
And I think we can go a little more in depth on that on another episode, but just know that that exists, and that there's a test you can take. It does cost money. You can study to take it. You can study for free, or you can pay for services. But
Well, and given the regulation that's going to happen, like number one, it's wise because you are going to learn a lot about what is expected. It's required in some places, but like if you're a serious photographer, videographer, and we would really recommend that you take certification process very seriously. And we'll cover that in depth in another episode, but, you know, take yourself seriously, allow yourself to be, just the absolute, picture of a great drone pilot. And that includes like following all the airspace rules and communicating with the appropriate authorities so that, you know, you can put that on your marketing and businesses are going to feel more comfortable going with you over a hobbyist.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a great, I mean, to be able to go into a conversation with a potential client and say, hey, we can offer this,
Yes.
you know, and just showing that, and you can say, this is, you can even talk about your process if they're curious. And you say it's that we get authorization if needed, you know, and with the FAA is like, it's comforting to them that you have it taken care of. Right. And that's what you want to do. You want to be safe. You want to have your stuff taken care of and, you know, buttoned up and
That's right.
and professional, right? Because that's what it comes down to. If you're working professionally, you want to have it, you know, taken care of.
Yeah. And so we'll list in our description of this podcast, we're going to list some of those resources that we've referred to, some of those apps. We can even link to a certification website for some more information because we want to be a resource to you. We'd love to hear from you. If you learned something new or if we said something that's inaccurate, we would love to hear. Just feel free, pop in there.
And podcast at slabvisuals.com. So you can email us podcast at slabvisuals.com.
Yes. Yeah. We'll respond quickly. If you're just listening on your favorite platform today, thank you. And just know that you can always watch us as well at youtube.com/@SLAB Of course, we'd love it if you
I'd
subscribe.
rather that you listen to us and not watch us.
Yeah. I'm telling you, if you're just listening, you're missing a real pretty face over here. He's got a full beard that you would envy. So check us out.
No.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't personally envy it because, you know, society says I shouldn't have a beard. But, you know, maybe our male demographics would. I don't know. I digress. We'd love to hear from you. We really appreciate you listening, and we hope that you'll join us for our next podcast.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us.